My name is Joe Zikas. I'm with NewHomeNotebook.com. I'm sitting here with Lloyd Gussis, who's an attorney who concentrates his practice in real estate.
I don't care when I see the title commitment. I've been doing this a long enough time where I can actually see the title commitment at the closing. It wouldn't be a problem. But lenders want the commitment, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the closing. So when you put in something in the contract that says they'll give me the title commitment 2 days before the closing, I need to say, no, it's got to be, you got to give it to us long, way before that, because the lender's going to want it, and the lender's not going to want to close without it, and you're just going to delay things. And most of the time, that's not an issue. But you clean up those kinds of things.
A lot of little technical issues that an experienced lawyer is going to deal with that a less experienced one might not.
One hopes so.
Right.
One hopes so. And again, a lot of it would come out in the wash anyway. But again, you've been around the track too many times.
It comes out in extra hours spent at the closing. It comes out in delayed closings.
Yes, exactly.
Comes out in a lot of pain for everybody.
Exactly.
So
arguing and getting nervous about things that you shouldn't have to. One of the things that's important to me would be the buyer having the right to bring a home inspector with them during the final inspection of the property prior to the closing. Now, it's like everything else. There's good with that and there's bad with that. The good with that from a buyer standpoint is it gives him a better trained set of eyes to say, something, that wall is not exactly, it looks bowed, or they missed a spot up there or whatever. Where I walk in and I look around and it looks great.
Or they only put in half the electrical outlets they were supposed to.
Exactly. And the kicker is that the final walkthrough inspection becomes critical, because if you miss it and you raise it later, the developer's response is, how do I know that I did that and you didn't? In other words, you miss a scratch on a cabinet, you miss a whatever. The typical response is, well, you did that when you moved in. Mm-hmm. Or you've been in here a week, how do I know that I did it? It might have been you. So therefore, the punch list...
Don't the developers have a representative, a service rep, who goes around and does that?
Before the closing. Because after the closing, they don't want to know from punch list items, new punch list items, most of the time. They're dealing then with not only completing what you've already told them, but then it's basically warranty issues. The toilet doesn't work, fix it. I'm getting water in here, fix it, whatever it is. But they're not going to be dealing with new punch list items. Now, there are some developers who give you 30 days, but those are few and far between. They'll give you 30 days after the closing to make up a punch list after you've moved in, which is nice. It's few and far between. But anyway,
I would never have done that.
No, but if you have a home inspector with you at the final inspection, they can help you find the things that you need to add to the punch list.
How much latitude should that inspector? I've heard from home inspectors, for example, that developers have barred them from access to the common areas.
Well, I'm getting there. To me,
and that there have been serious problems in those common areas.
Usually the inspection is limited to the unit, number one. The punch list is through the unit. But what you get, and it's the other side of the coin, again, in a busy market, developers don't want to spend 6 hours with a guy going through and looking with a magnifying glass on everything. They don't want a home inspector to tell them how to build the unit. Well, I don't like the way you vented that. It should have been over here. Code says that the return vent should have been 6 inches off here instead of 10. Developers get very upset with that kind of. So what I try and do is tell the client, get a home inspector to go with you during that final walkthrough. But try and control them a little bit, because if you start doing that, it's only going to be antagonism between the two. Now, obviously, if you find something that's wrong, that's a different issue. But I think it's important that a home inspector go with, and I always put that in, because there are developers who don't want home inspectors to go in because they don't want they don't want to spend the time there, and they don't want to deal with you didn't do this right, you didn't do this right. So that I think is important as well.
The question I was going to ask, I had there are very bad developers out there. Can you ask your attorney, or does the attorney ever volunteer?
Once in
and
my...
I understand that it's a difficult situation.
One time, I know for sure, somebody came in and wanted to buy, and I told them that I wouldn't buy from that developer, and if they wanted to, I thought they should get somebody else to represent them. But that was a real personal... I had a closing that was really... shouldn't have happened, but the buyer insisted on closing the unit really not being done, and had a real bad experience after the closing. So I told them not to. Other than that, I'll tell you who's more familiar with it are the realtors than the lawyers. You know, I know from a lawyer, the realtors in terms of seeing places and dealing with the developers are probably more on top of this guy never finishes. You know, he's hard to deal with, those kinds of analysis. I can tell you from the lawyer standpoint who will be easier to deal with than not, and who I'd rather deal with than not. But frankly, my feeling is that the buyer is much more concerned about the house he's buying than whether I have acrimony with the other lawyer or not. So, you know, you try and keep that
not
to
so
a
much
minimum.
acrimony, but you are aware that, you know, that guy
There are certain things that are...
been sued 40 times and that he's comfortable with that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, so you point out and you let people make their own decision.
Okay.